Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Julie Mann, and I show men and women how they can create healthy, happy, sustainable lives. And I'm really delighted because today I'm joined by Carole Cooney. Hi, Carole.
Hi, Julie. How are you?
I'm good. It's really nice to see you.
Good to be here.
Good. So for those of you that don't yet know who Carole is, she runs Opal Lettings. So before we get into that, Carole, I'd really love to know a little bit about your background. So tell us about the kind of childhood you had.
I had a very strict childhood, a very strict Catholic upbringing, but by the same token, it was a loving childhood. The parents were strict but fair. We got a slap if we did anything wrong, but so did everybody else. But they never actually abused us. They never beat us up, or they never. Thankfully, they weren't sexual predators. In general, we thought it was quite strict at the time. But as soon as you went to school, your friends in school, they're getting the same treatment, and there was a lot of church, which I am a Christian, a strong Christian, but I felt there was too much church back in the day in my childhood, I suppose. It was no worse and no better than anybody else. And at this point in time, when I see what some people have endured during their childhood, do you know what? I had an absolutely brilliant childhood.
Wow. So do you come from a really big family, Carole?
No, there's only three of us. Quite comically, one of the methods of contraception in Ireland is get married when you're about 40, so that you can only have about 3 kids.
Oh my goodness. So tell us about the kind of things that your parents taught you that you still consider really valuable.
Respect, punctuality, respect for other people. Even if you hated somebody, there's no need to be unpleasant to them. You might want to have nothing to do with them, but you can do the basics of polite, respectful behavior towards a fellow human being.
Absolutely. So what were the things that your parents taught you? I mean, obviously you've mentioned some of the things, but were there things that your parents taught you that weren't so great, that actually didn't really serve you and actually maybe limited you in some way? Can you remember?
You see, I was born in the early to mid 60s, and back then women were very suppressed. And my mother finished up her life as a head teacher, but she was education, which is fine and it's good. But back then there were a lot less opportunities for women, for people in general. You were expected to either go to university, get a job in the bank, or become a teacher, or become a nurse, or get married. There wasn't much else. It was kind of when in the mid 80s I moved to England when I was in my very early 20s. And there was more opportunity then, but Ireland was, it was very backward up until about 30 years ago, and the church ruled all. But the influence of the church has kind of receded in more recent decades, and Ireland is just as modern nowadays, if you like, as anywhere else. When there's nothing wrong with the church in itself, but it's when it suppresses all other aspects of society, because everything brings something to the whole.
Yeah. So did you move to the UK because you wanted more opportunity?
I met a boyfriend in a nightclub who was home in Ireland over the Christmas holidays, and I was working as an advertising sales clerk in the local newspaper office. I'd been there since the age of 18, and I was a trainee journalist as well, side by side with that. And I met this guy in a nightclub in Ireland over the Christmas holidays, January 1985. By the end of, December 1984, I should say. By the end of January 1985, I had moved over to London. And shortly after I moved over to London, he and I broke up, but both of us had just come out of previous relationships. So on hindsight, I think we were kind of a stepping stone for each other to redesign our lives.
Yeah, so what happened to the journalism then? What happened from then to right up to now?
Well, I was trained as a secretary, and I tried to get into journalism college and didn't succeed. So started in the local newspaper. But, you know, one of my attributes would be writing anyway. And I've done a bit of scribbling, a lot of scribbling, and published author as well over the years. So I was confident in my own ability on that score. So, but when I moved to London first, I just kind of took office work and stuff like that. And then I met another guy whom I'm now married to. After about a year or two together, we decided to go into the hospitality industry. So we did our training in London, and we were moved up the country to Cambridgeshire. Moved back to London for a while because whatever pub or whatever hotel became available for management kind of thing, you know, you'd be offered it or whatever. Moved back to London for a while, but loved Cambridgeshire. Moved back up and have stayed here since.
That's quite grueling work, isn't it? Managing pubs and hospitality, long hours, you know, very unsociable.
It is. I mean, after we left the pub, I was briefly working at night time for a DHL office, and they wanted some of us to work on Christmas Day. And some of the guys, that youngish guys, I was by now in my early 40s, and some of the youngish guys that were in the office with us, oh, I don't want to work on Christmas. This is awful. We should have Christmas off. And I says, honey, I haven't had a Christmas Day off for 24 years.
Wow. So your parents really did instill you with that work ethic.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a January, on the first, oh, sorry, not the first, because New Year's Eve is a busy one, but on the 2nd of January, most landlords are on a plane en route to the Caribbean, because January is a quiet month in the pub, and they need it because Christmas used to start in October. I mean, when you were cooking for all the local businesses and doing all their Christmas parties and planning the Christmas raffle and then all the other Christmas entertainments that you'd lay on. You know, Christmas was serious business 20 odd years ago in the pub and hotel industry.
Yeah. So what happened then for you to be Opal Lettings?
Well, the pub industry, my husband is a bit older than me for a start, and the pub hotel industry, nightclub industry has been on a very gradual decline since the mid-80s. That became more evident in the mid-90s when the drunk driving laws got stricter. However, I agree with that because I have no truck with anyone who drinks and drive, because that's a deliberate act of sabotage. Not just that, then the all day opening came in as well in the early it was around 2000 and I can't remember, but the all day opening came in, and at the end of the day, most people have only got X amount of money to spend eating out or drinking out, and they're not going to be queuing up to get in the door at 4:20 on a Wednesday morning. So, you know, an all day opening 24 society is not feasible in a rural village pub restaurant. And then in 2007, just before we left, the smoking ban came in so, you know, various things. People all have Sky TV at home, so you don't have to watch the football match in the pub. They now all have an ice machine in their American freezer. So all these various things have killed off the hospitality industry. So we knew it was time to leave. So then, as a result of a family incident in 2007, I inherited some money. So I bought a few houses and gradually drifted into lettings because people were saying to me, you know, I'm fed up with my lettings agent. They're bloody useless. They're a pain in the behind and this, that and the other. Please manage my houses for me. I said, well, all right then. Well, I better learn how to do it first. So.
I love your attitude, Carole, that you just make things happen. What would you say of all the things you've done in your life have been the biggest challenges? I mean, I know you talked about a few, but are there others that perhaps you haven't mentioned? Or is there one?
There are a few, because I was in the hospitality industry and because it can get quite violent. I suppose I could compare myself to a nurse or a police officer, because in their cases, more than once, they've probably been the wrong end of a barrel of a gun, as I have in the hospitality industry. They've probably been stabbed. or they've probably had somebody attempt to stab them. So yes, there are incidents in my past hospitality life along those lines.
So how did you deal with someone pointing a gun at you?
I told him to go for it.
Wow, and that did the trick.
I was 26. I said, I can't swear on here, but there was swearing involved. So, Foxtrot you, I said, shoot me if you want to, because I mean, back then I wouldn't back down from nobody. I was like a little terrier. I'd be scared nowadays, I think. But at the time, his friend and my husband were behind him, getting the gun out of his hand, so they took it away. He was off his face on drugs, so it wasn't difficult to overpower him.
Did that really scare you? I mean, were you then concerned that it would happen again, or how did you deal with it after the event?
I'd rather not say.
Okay, all right. So tell us about exactly what you do with Opal Lettings and why you do it.
Because I'm passionate about houses. I've always been. When I first worked in the newspaper office in Ireland, I actually lived in a HMO when I first left home, age 17, 18. At the time, I didn't know it was a HMO. And so I always thought, that woman, I didn't realise all the intricacies of it, of course. But I always thought, oh, well, that woman, we're all living in her house. There's nothing special about it. We'd never dare complain if anything went wrong or anything like that. We only had basic electricity anyway at the time. There was no internet or anything back in the day. And she's sitting at home in her own house, and she's making loads of money, or so I thought. But I didn't realise, of course, what a mortgage was at the time, or taxes, or anything else. And I sort of said to myself, well, how about if I could do that? But it was an idea that got buried over the years. But because I unexpectedly inherited some money, and we were getting on a bit and not qualified for anything in particular, I thought to myself, well, this is my only chance. I've got to do something useful with this money, something that'll bring in money. I mean, you're talking business. What you really need, the best type of business to be in is something that repeats subscription. But whether you set up a website that you're selling a product for or whatever, the same amount of money needs to be coming in from that customer every month, repeat business. And of course, rental income is repeat business. So I earn a bit of rent. I have 3 HMOs and 2 single lets of my own, as well as the house that I live in. And at the moment, I have around 27 or 28, with about 5 or 6 in production, as I call it, belong to other people. So I earn some money from my own HMO tenants, and I look after them extremely well. And I earn some commission for managing the other 26, 28. I mean, that changes because I'm about to lose one because the landlord is selling up. That happens too. Another one I'll be losing in the spring because the landlord is knocking it down and redeveloping. That's happens. But then I've got 4 more. I've got 2 that I'm putting on offer at the moment, and I've got 4 more that I'll have on my books by the end of the year. That's kind of the way it goes.
Brilliant. So you talked about the fact you give really great service. So when you say you give great service, what makes you different from any other letting agent?
Being a lettings agent is similar to being a cleaner. Start at the ceiling, work your way down, miss nothing, simples.
I love that expression. So if there are any landlords listening, Carole, or people who maybe are thinking about letting out their property, what do they need to know?
Lots. To keep themselves out of trouble with the law, because the government keep meddling in the housing industry, and the government are the cause of the fact that we need to build 300,000 houses a year in the UK for the next 10 years to just catch up with demand. But I could go on about that all day. That's a totally different soapbox that I shall get off of. But there are lots of laws. There's EICR, which is a new law for single lets. It means that the electrical, it's literally, it stands for electrical installation condition report. And an EICR test now has to be done once every 5 years. They keep changing the criteria on that with updates on what extra needs to be done. We don't know how long it will last for, that it needs to be done every 5 years, because they might do it every 3 years or every 2 years. They're considering that. Energy performance certificate levels are changing. At the moment, D is an acceptable form of energy, but part of the government driving us all towards the green energy scheme that they're wanting to implement and remove us from solid fuels. The level of compliance for the energy performance certificate, we believe at the moment is 2024, but that's going up to C. That's going to cost some landlords £10,000 per property. There's loads of things like that happening, and it keeps evolving as time goes along. And basically, the government are trying to drive the small private landlord out of the property market, despite the fact that the property market relies on 53% of the PRS to provide much needed accommodation. So the government are busily being very stupid and cutting their nose off to spite their face. And I did say I wouldn't get on my soapbox.
Well, I mean, obviously you feel very passionate about those things. Yeah. And, you know, it obviously sounds like if anyone is truly thinking about renting out a property, you know, buying property and renting out, actually, it isn't always plain sailing, and they really do need someone who's going to manage that property, and that's where you come in.
Money in it. There is money in it, but it's not easy.
Yeah. Okay. So what are the things, or is there something that, of all the things you've done, you're most proud of?
I suppose having my 2 boys. Okay. I know it's a cliche, but you know, everyone adores their kids, don't they?
Yeah. Well, I think that's wonderful. I'm very proud of my daughter.
Yeah.
What do you do when you're not working, Carole?
I read a lot. I go out occasionally. I like walking. Because working or not, I have a border collie, so he helps with that. But I do around 12,000 steps a day. And there's a Tesco's on my doorstep, and a B&Q and a Cineworld and all that. So it's about a quarter of a mile walk there and a quarter of a mile walk back. So if I just need a pint of milk or something, I'll do my weekly shop elsewhere maybe. Well, if I just need a pint of milk or something, I'll stroll up to Tesco's. There are 24-hour Tesco's anyway, so you know, I incorporate things like that in, so as I do my 12,000 steps a day.
Wow, that's brilliant. 12,000 steps is quite a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
And are you still writing?
Yeah, I still do a bit of scribbling. I write an article for the local property things roughly about once a month, although I haven't written anything really for that since about July, August. You know, and I post them on my profiles, LinkedIn, Facebook, and so forth. But I can be a bit sporadic on that because, I mean, if a new landlord in a new property, or if a tenant is leaving and we need to remarket a property, they're the customers. So the tenants and the landlords come first. The articles will just have to wait until, and at the moment it was quite busy during the summer, but then my husband became ill in August, and I had to look after him, but that was good because August is quiet, so the property didn't interfere with that during August.
Well, gosh, so you're obviously a very, very busy woman, and you love what you do, which is fantastic. One final question, Carole. When you're no longer on this planet, how would you like to be remembered? Now,
that is a $6 million question. Yeah. She was always up for a good old laugh.
Oh, that's great. I love that.
Humour is more important than anything, isn't it?
Absolutely. We've got to keep our sense of humour, haven't we? Yeah. So thank you ever so much for talking to us, Carole Cooney.
Thank you very much, Julie, for having me.